Hello, hello, and welcome to In the Salmon. We are up to season 3, episode 4, Nuan.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
to all the listeners out there, you might have heard a different intro. Nuan, what did you think of that intro? A new one.
Oh, dude, I'll tell you what, it's really, really good. I really rate it. I like how it just starts off by saying, "You are now in the salmon." And it's like full serious at that point. So, no, great work with that, man. We'll definitely be using that intro going forward. It's very unique, very, very clever, very creative, and it's got that
That's
nice
right.
cricket. It's got that nice cricket vibe to it as well. Bit of cheering crowds and a couple of sixes being hit, and that's what you love to see. But no, great
Exactly
stuff,
right.
great stuff. It's always good to keep things moving. But yeah, we're back for another episode.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Thought I might just I sort of like we're 3 seasons in now. I thought we might change things up with the opening intro. So
Oh
spend a
yeah,
bit of time on that. So it's good to hear your
absolutely,
feedback. No, I appreciate it. And
absolutely.
yeah, let's get things started. So obviously we've
Hmm.
got a lot of cricket to catch up on.
Yeah.
Those of you playing along, we were super invested in the Australian India cricket
Oh yeah.
tour. The what is it? The Border Gavaskar
Trophy. Mm.
trophy.
Mm, mm, mm.
So as of right now, live scenes, India's just won the second test.
Yeah.
And in saying that they've won, actually retained, or did they retain? Did they have it like
They
before?
have they've retained the Border Gavaskar
They've
trophy,
retained it.
so they've held on to it for now more than 5 years. You know,
Eesh.
because if you think about it, the last time India Australia was back in 2020, and India
Mhm.
won that series, and then before
Mhm.
that was 2018, and India won that series. So
Mm.
if there's one Test series that Australia is struggling at right now, it's certainly the Border Gavaskar trophy. So yeah, it's certainly a hot topic at the moment.
Yeah, definitely hot indeed. No one. There was a couple of things that we wanted to talk about previous to, I
Mm,
guess, sort of the test series.
mm,
One revelation, and I guess sort of one person that I was quite skeptical on,
mm.
were the likes of young Todd Murphy. Now, I think in a previous episode, Mitchy, one of your
Yeah,
special guests, had come up and brought him up, and you both seemed to back him. I was a bit skeptical, I'll admit,
yeah,
just
yeah.
because he was quite raw and he hadn't seen a lot of international cricket, but I
Mm.
had to bite my tongue, as it turns out, in the first test. What a revelation.
Yeah,
Absolutely tore it up. Actually
yeah.
made Nathan Lyon look second class, and
He
that's
did.
not an easy thing to do.
No,
Did you
absolutely not.
expect him to perform that well, or
Well,
what do you think?
I'll be honest. I didn't expect him to get 7 wickets in his debut game. He's only a young bloke. He's only 22 years old.
Hmm.
He's from country Victoria, so he's grown up on pitches that don't necessarily suit spin bowling as well. So
Hmm.
he would have been coached to a different style of bowling.
Yep.
Um, but I think what stood out for this young kid is how well he adjusted to bowling on Indian conditions, and that's where Nathan Lyon sort of faltered, because Nathan Lyon was bowling spin as though he was bowling on an Australian pitch, right? Um,
Yeah.
to demonstrate why Nathan Lyon was not successful in the first test,
Hmm.
I've got a prop here. I've got my
Oh, here's one
I've,
I prepared earlier. Let's see
yeah.
it.
Here's what I prepared earlier. I've got a cricket ball here. So when this, hopefully, if anyone listening in, if anyone watching this, what Nathan Lyon did wrong in the first test is this, right? When you bowl spin in India, right? There's a tactic or the style of bowling called square seam bowling, whereas let's say I'm an off spin bowler, the seam is sort of like parallel with the crease when you release the ball. That
Hmm.
exerts something called side spin. And on Indian pitches where they're really rough and they're playing on like dust bowls, bowling square seam, as they say, is really useful, because when the ball hits the pitch, it can either go straight or it'll turn sharply.
Mm.
Okay. What Nathan Lyon does, he bowls a traditional off spin, which is, instead of the seam going parallel with the crease, he's got
Mm.
the seam tilt at 45 degrees, sort of
45.
facing the fine leg. So he's
Yep.
bowling up and over the ball. So his finger is going over the ball instead of
Mm.
around the ball. So what
Hmm.
that does is he gets less spin, but he gets more bounce.
Right.
Now,
Okay.
right, he gets more bounce. So the ball comes up at you. So you're on the back foot. Now, bounce is amazing in Australia because those pitches are suited for that. But on
Mm.
Indian pitches, you rarely get big bounce. You get a lot of
Hmm.
that really sharp turn, that the ball just grips. And when you bowl over, like up and over, we say up and over the ball, up the back of the ball, you're
Hmm.
not gonna get that sort of purchase that you want, right?
Hmm.
The other thing that Lyon sort of did is that he kind of bowled to get bounce. So he was bowling a lot slower, tossing it up really high. He was often bowling like a fifth, sixth stump line, right,
Hmm.
to the right hander batsman. And what that does is that creates a lot of width. And for players like Rohit Sharma or Pujara, even Kohli, they love that. They just rock on the back foot and just cut it. Like no issues,
Yeah.
no dramas, right? So Todd Murphy, he really, from what I can see, he really studied the way Jadeja is bowling, the way Ashwin is bowling, and he sort of replicated that. And why he was successful is because he was very accurate. Um,
Hmm.
his economy rate was under 3 runs and over the whole match, which is amazing for a debut spinner. He didn't get
Hmm.
smashed around much, and the Indians could sense that. They respected his bowling, right? They were absolutely smashing Lyon to all parts of the ground, but whenever Todd Murphy was bowling, they just blocked it. They wait for the bad ball and stuff like that. But that's my analysis, thanks to this wonderful prop,
Mm.
my cricket ball. But kudos to Todd Murphy. I think he's worth the investment. He'll have bad days, of course. He'll have days where he performs poorly, but he's young, so
Hmm.
heaps of time to coach him, train him. He could be a star of the future, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess like begs the question, why like Nathan Lyon with the amount of experience that he has,
Mm.
why was he doing it like why was he going the
Why was he
45
going that way?
degree?
That's
Yeah.
that's good. That's a good question. And the thing is, it's really hard to, like, as an off spinner, it's hard to adjust from one style to another style. Effectively, you need to turn your wrist as well. So when you bowl up and over the ball, it comes more naturally, right? To bowl square seam, you literally have to, like, your wrist is facing the batsman. So you're bowling, and then, like,
Mm.
you're pushing out the ball as opposed to going like over, right? So
Mm.
it's a bit of a tricky one to explain, but it's just something that comes with practice. And I guess being young, he's probably open to learning more things. Whereas Nathan Lyon has been bowling for 12, 10, 12, 13 years, so he's
That's what
stuck
I'm
in a
saying
certain
though.
way. Yeah.
What's Nathan Lyon's excuse? His entire job is to bowl off spin, and he knows the conditions of India quite well.
Yeah.
I'm not like I'm a pretty harsh critic when it comes to these things, as you know, Nuan. Like
Of course.
I don't think Nathan Lyon's got any kind of excuse. If
No.
what you're saying is the reason why he's bowled poorly, and
Mm.
like obviously, I'm a part-time offie myself in
Mm.
subbies, you know what I mean? But if what you're saying is correct, there's
Yeah.
not really any excuse that you can give Nathan Lyon. Would you agree?
No. Absolutely not. I mean,
Okay.
he's Australia's best spinner since Shane Warne. There's the numbers stated. He has all the experience.
Hmm.
Um, but at the
It's
same time, you
disappointing
got
then that a young bloke just like this, who's, as you said, come out of country Victoria's, come out and just and show
regional.
Nathan Lyon how to bowl offies, man. Like
Mm.
who would have thought? It's an interesting one for sure, huh?
It is, but it goes to show that Australia can't keep making up these excuses that oh, the pitch turns too much, or India's doctoring the pitch, and there's always these big complaints about spin. But, like, if you're gonna come to that part of the world, you got to learn to play spin.
Simple as
Um,
that.
there's no ifs and buts about it. Just
Just like when India come to Australia, they've got to learn how to to play on
right.
a seaming deck. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? You don't see them whinging and complaining when the
No.
ball's whizzing past their throat at 150 k's an hour left arm, over the wicket. Mitchell Johnson.
Yeah.
You know what
And
I
in
mean?
fact, they won the bloody series as well twice. you know.
So make it make sense, man. Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
thing. I did want to talk about the doctoring thing just briefly. Obviously,
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
is
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
hot topic.
It is. It is.
Um, and obviously, like we both play cricket in our respective clubs as
Mm.
well. I think that for me, the general notion around the club is it's a normal practice, and I think the term or the phrase "doctoring a pitch" has a lot of negative connotations
It
attached to
does.
it. But all it is it's just a curator creating a pitch to slightly advantage the home side, right? And
100%.
that
100%.
is always
Mm.
going to be the case no matter where you go, right?
Of
And
course.
it's this when you come home, a home side advantage is a phrase that has been coined for a reason.
Of
You're
course.
playing at home, you should be having being given a little bit of an advantage. And if you're going
100%.
overseas somewhere else, it should be more of a challenge because you're playing in unfamiliar conditions,
100%.
right? At
100%.
the same time, would you not play in really hot weather if you're from
Mm.
England because it's at it's just not
Yeah.
right. I don't think. What
Yeah.
do you think?
Now, look, this whole doctoring a pitch nonsense, like we always hear stuff like this coming out of India. The truth is, I mean, look, the truth is every country prepares a pitch to favor their bowlers, right?
That's right.
In Sri Lanka, like, the pitch is turning from day 2 in Gale to
Mm.
to favor Murali and Ranganaherata, right? You go to England, there's like green tops for days to suit Broad and Anderson,
And
right?
Henderson, yeah,
You go to Pakistan where they're like flat as a freaking road, and you
that's a
got the likes
driveway,
of,
yeah,
yeah, like Yunus Khan and Muhammad Yusuf and all these Pakistani players just turning up for fun, right?
batting 3 days,
Everyone
yeah.
everyone's gonna naturally produce a pitch that favors their home team more.
Mhm.
India's no different. And in the end, did it make a difference? Did it really make a difference? I don't think so. I mean,
Yeah.
if the pitch is that bad, if the pitch is that horrendous to bat on, then how does India score 400 in one innings with Rohit Sharma turning up, right?
And quite comfortably as well. Like
Yeah.
Pat Cummins was bowling like a
Mm.
scared like
Mm.
debutant, as it looked like. He was bowling
Yeah.
very wayward. And at
Yeah.
that point, you can't even blame the pitch. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, where are you pitching the ball?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
for you to blame the pitch, you've got to pitch it on a right and a correct line. If you're bowling wayward from the start, there's no real argument there.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show that even the Australian batsmen, they were just playing the wrong line.
Yeah.
The first 4 or 5 batsmen that went out were just playing the wrong line. The pitch had nothing to do with it.
Yeah. I think for me,
So,
it's a very psychological thing. I think if
yeah.
you look, the really funny thing is, in both those test matches, I think 5 or 6 wickets went to the Indian pace bowlers. All right, so the likes of Mohammad Shami and Mohammad
Shami,
Siraj, they were carving it up. Like they were bowling just regular pace, like swinging it, cutting it, seaming it, things that Australians are pretty much used to growing up, right? So
Exactly right.
where's the excuse there? I think it's psychological. I think it's purely like in the mind,
Yep.
because there are other countries that come to India and they do well on spinning decks, right?
Yeah,
I think
they've been prepared. They
Yeah.
prepare, and on top of that, they have a stronger mentality, which is really unfortunate. I'd like to say, because Australia have historically been quite a strong, fierce, competitive side.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And for them to come here and you see all these media reports talking about doctored pitch and this, that, it comes off as very, and if I can say, it comes off as very soft. And
Oh yeah,
you
Yeah.
would never ever hear the likes of Alan Border himself. We're talking about the Alan Border Gavaskar
Yeah.
Trophy. Never hear Alan Border whinging and complain about the pitch, I dare
No.
say, or even Ricky Ponting for that matter. And not to say that Pat Cummins did himself, but he's certainly, I don't think he sort of defended India to the degree that he might have, if he
No.
thought it was a fair situation going on. Yeah.
Yeah. I think look, it's always like a common hot topic. Like whenever Australia India comes up, like there's always this like they use the excuse of like a bad pitch to cushion their excuses to why they lost. Oh, it's India. No, it's always hard to win there. It's just India. But no, you can't say that, man.
You
Like,
can't say that. If it's hard to play in India, you just say it's hard to play in India, because as India is an absolute fortress, and it is so different to playing in Australia. And if you don't come prepared, and if you as a country and as a captain and whatever committee decided this to not play warm-up matches and to be ill prepared, then you face situations where you get beaten by an innings, and you should not complain about it.
No, absolutely not.
Complain about it.
The only time you can complain is if both sides are playing poorly, right? So if India is also struggling on the same wicket, then you have like a reason to be like, okay, look, this is actually a really bad pitch, because even the home side is struggling. And I think that happened in the India Sri Lanka Test series when Sri Lanka came. Like there were some really horrible pitches then. Both India and Sri Lanka made like less than 150 in both innings and stuff like that.
I mean, not to say that India's never shown up like a subpar pitch. It's happened a lot of times.
Yeah,
this was not one of those times.
No, absolutely not.
That's all we're saying.
Absolutely not. And I think just going forward, I think the Australians they need to work on their batting. It's not the pitch; it's the mind games. So obviously, at the time of this podcast, the second test has just concluded and India's won by 6 wickets. But if you look at Australia's second innings in the second test, what was that shot selection? What was that? Like it was just sweep city. It was just sweep city, And what's funny? They're getting out to balls that were not turning. That's the thing that happened in India. But everything just straight. Even Mark Waugh was saying in the commentary, it was like India is bowling stump to stump, and Australia is playing these what he calls low percentage shots. Right? That's just how it is. And then when India came out to bat, you see the way Rohit Sharma just jumps down the wicket, launches it.
To exert some kind of confidence. If you bat and your whole mentality is quite weak and sort of just like you're just battling to survive, you're making things exponentially more difficult than it is. If you believe in yourself and you have the right, I guess, sort of, and it begs the question if these guys have like consultants and things like that, just to like mentally prepare them as well, because cricket is, especially Test cricket, as you know, Noan, it's not just a physical thing. It's a mental. It's a game of chess, right? It's more mental than anything.
Yeah.
And if you're not mentally prepared, then good luck to you playing in foreign conditions.
100%. 100%. I think
you talked about sorry, go on.
I think just to wrap up this one, I think the last time another country defeated India at home in a Test series was England back in 2012, I think. So it's been more than like a decade, I think, since
so that's the thing, though. So that's why the media is so quick to make these claims, like try to paint this picture, but the players and you know the staff at Cricket Australia need to be onto that, and they shouldn't be swayed by the historical difficulties that teams have come across coming into India, right? Because if you dwell on that, then good luck to you, man. Like, how are you supposed to believe in yourself when you're talking about the fact that no one's beaten India in over a decade in India? You know what I mean? You know, like Mitchie said it himself, he thought this was one of the strongest teams that Australia's produced, right? So if you got little Mitchie who is a sports fan believing in Australia, that needs to be seen all the way up to the top tier, and that's how you win these games.
But I think it's good that Australia got defeated like this, because it's going to humble them. I think when they came out of the home test summer, they were sky high with confidence, and rightly so. And rightly so, but there's given how they've just been just crashed in a heap. It goes to show that they were really just playing test cricket on training wheels, as we mentioned in earlier episodes.
That's what I mean. I called it, man, and I you know, like I'm
you did
when it comes to these things. Yeah, they were going to get a rude awakening, and I didn't think it was going to be this rude.
Yeah,
I was almost offended as a innocent bystander, Sri Lankan bystander. But, you know?
Yeah, I know, right? Like, but I mean, even the likes of Sri Lanka, when Sri Lanka come to India to play test cricket, we always get absolutely flogged as well. And you know, Sri Lanka has similar spinning conditions to India as well. And Australia tried to use that as confidence, because they did beat Sri Lanka at home, but then Sri Lanka came back. And so, you know, India is different because it's more the mental side of the game as well. But they just know how to bowl in their conditions really well. Like, the Indians are so familiar with their conditions. It's amazing, you know?
I mean, India have two of the best all-rounders at the moment in Test cricket. You know, we saw the likes of Ravindra Jadeja took a 7 for just now, right?
Just
and
casual.
Jadeja himself, and he can bat like an absolute menace as well. He's crazy, dude. And obviously one of the best fielders in the world as well. He is the absolute pinnacle of what you would call an all-rounder in Test cricket.
The ultimate.
He is absolutely a weapon, you know. And then you got Ravichandran Ashwin batting at the other end, coming in at night as a night watchman, right? You know, like, good luck to you. They just got outclassed. And you know, what I wanted to ask you as well was the selection. Very interesting selection. Coming up to the first test, we saw the likes of Travis Head not get chosen.
I think he was stupid.
Fourth in the test, and I was very, very angry about that myself. And then, you know, Warner was picked. I want to ask you, Warner's had a pretty abysmal record in India prior to this series itself. Has further proven that Warner is just not up to par playing in India. He did score a double 100 recently in Australia, and somehow snagged the man of the series.
No one cares.
Which, you know, we shan't talk about that because I actually don't know how that happened. Do you think David Warner's days are numbered? Do you think his career in the Test format is coming to an end? What do you think?
He needs to go. He needs to go. But he has plans to stick around for the 2024 T20 World Cup. I'm like, mate. I'm like, no.
Not even for T20. I think for T20 he's okay, but I think for Test it's
I think, like, why is Cricket Australia so obsessed about giving this man so many chances? Like, I've never understood it. Like, you know, it's a bit of a more, you know, I guess a more an analytical question to ask. But David Warner's always given a lifeline. He's always given opportunity to, like, present himself. You know, he's useless in India. David Warner is a useless batsman in India. And if you look at the way he got out, right, he wasn't even out to pace. It wasn't even out to spin. It was out to pace. You saw that ball from Mohammad Shami. He just absolutely cut him in half.
It's a good ball, though.
Well, I mean, it's not what look, it's not what you want first up. Like, what can you do about it? But like, he's a typical flat track bully, man. Like, put him on the pitch where there's a bit of movement, bit of spin. He's absolutely done for.
You
know. I mean, look, fair enough. He came on the scene as a T20 specialist, right? David Warner came onto the scene in 2009 as a T20 hitter, and he said that he wanted to be a Test match player, right? He was actually going to be. He was
very well in Test,
right? He, admirably, averages about 45, and you know, otherwise he would have become like a Chris Lynn kind of player. He would have only been T20s only. But he's just got this weird obsession with Cricket Australia to just keep giving David Warner chances as though he's going to perform like.
You're talking about it in the Test format specifically?
Oh yeah, in the Test format, like in Test, because like you know, after ball tampering, I thought he'd be done. I thought that was it, you know. And then he had his supporters, he had his people who were like, nah, there's still a bit left in David Warner. He can still play. And he you know, he performed, and then he made that double ton against South Africa. But like, you need to look at the context of David Warner's innings to see what kind of player he is.
Mm.
He averages like under 35 or something overseas collectively. He's
Mhm.
woeful. He's woeful in England, abysmal in India, right? You know, two countries where you typically want to perform quite well, right?
Yikes. Yeah.
And he gets these bulk runs in Australia, which is fair enough, like as most Australian batsmen do. But
Mhm.
you want to at least average above 40, or at least 35 even to be
Yeah,
respectable,
you have to
you know?
adjust to the conditions. It can't there
Yeah.
can't be such a massive. I mean, in saying that, other players do have like big differences when they go overseas and stuff
Hmm.
as well. But I think David Warner in particular, with the amount of like I guess sort of expectation that he carries on his shoulders, especially coming into such a monumental series like this, he just really underperformed, and it's
Oh
disappointing to
yeah,
see. Should he
100%.
play in the T20 World Cup? He probably will. I think he probably should. There's still a lot that he has to give to cricket. I think he's still got a couple of good years in him, at least in white ball. But in test, his time is probably nigh, I would say.
Oh yeah,
To go out with after hitting a double hundred recently, there's
that would have been good.
no shame in that. Yeah, so
No, it would have
he
been.
just
It would have
loves
been.
cricket, though. That's the thing about him, and you can tell he absolutely adores cricket to the point where he will do a Sana Jayasuri and play till he's 40 if given the opportunity. Look at you
No, look.
shaking your head.
I mean, look. Yeah, obviously, everyone plays for their country because they love cricket. That's a very cliche standard reason. But what I'm saying is, you got to go out on a high. I don't want David
Yeah,
Warner to do. I don't want David Warner to do a Sana Jayasuriya because already David
because-
Warner. Already, David Warner is one of the most unpopular cricketers in Australia. Let's be real about that, okay?
but he's
Like
very popular in India. Have
he's
you seen his
popular.
TikTok?
Oh my god! Don't get me started on that. The Indians absolutely love him.
They love
Um,
him.
but let's be real, man. There is not a lot of positive news about David Warner. Like whenever you mention David Warner in Australian media, it starts with a groan and oh, okay, yeah, another chance for him. And it's just I guess it's just the kind of character he's become. The way his family's always putting him in the media. It's like a they're like a D-list Harry and Meghan at times. You know what I mean? Like, oh, we don't want attention. We don't want attention, but the next minute they're like, in the
Give
news
me
for all
give me an
kinds.
interview. Give me an
Yeah, give
interview.
me an interview. Oh, let me tell you why it's so hard for me and stuff like that,
Oh
right?
my gosh.
So
Yeah.
he's a very unpopular character. Good, obviously a decent player, and he can perform when the time comes. But he
For the
needs to
record,
go.
David, I actually really like you, and I like the way that you bat and stuff. And I was vouching. I was really hoping you'd score runs this series. I think in a couple of episodes ago, I did make mention that I thought you would do well. If
Put
you
it
ever
this
do
way.
listen to this,
Put it this way. David Warner, the cricketer, a fine player. David Warner, the bloke. Be a few question marks there. That's all I'll say.
all right, let's move right along
Yeah.
before we get blacklisted by David Warner's wife or something.
Oh, dear.
um,
You said it, not me.
I did say it. I did say it.
Yeah.
I don't think. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, moving right along. I do. Well, I'm going to wrap up on this Indian Australian Test series. I did have
Yeah.
one quick question for you, then we'll move it right along
Yeah.
without taking too much time. The one,
Yeah.
with Travis Head, he did get picked in the second Test. He hit a fairly quick 40, I believe.
Yeah.
And do you think he's do you think because coming into the first test, my question was, what more did Travis Head have to do
Yeah.
to earn a spot in the side? Because
Yeah.
if they were looking at previous performances in India, David Warner's is abysmal, as you said. Let's all
Yeah.
agree on that. So
Yeah.
why not Travis Head get a go when
Yeah.
Travis Head was probably in better form than Warner? Like Warner hit a
Yeah.
200 sure, but every other innings in that test series was quite poor. Do the selection team just not fancy Travis Head as a whole? Like, how many hoops does he have to jump through to be a regular in the test side? Do you think?
I think the thing that's a great question. My answer to that is that, and it's a bit of a catch-22 because when I read an Instagram post, I read an article that actually broke down the Australian selectors' reasoning for
Sure.
why they omitted Travis Head from the first test in India.
Yep.
And I had a really good laugh at this. And they said, "Oh, we decided not to go with Travis Head in the first test because of his poor record in India, where he averages like 21 with the bat." Okay.
Okay.
And I'm like, okay, what about David Warner? He's been averaging 24,
Yeah.
25
And
almost
he's not
10
a bowling
years.
option either.
And he's not a bowling option, right? And that was pretty much it. They're like, oh, we wanted to go with two left-handers. They wanted to go with Renshaw or whoever they wanted, and that's why Travis Head was omitted. And I'm looking at that. I'm thinking, with Travis Head, you have a quality batsman. Yes, he hasn't played much in India, but you're only going to get experience by playing in India. It's a classic,
Exactly.
You
can't have it both ways, man. And
it's
like,
that classic.
if you're ranked
Yeah.
fourth in the world,
Mm.
do you not care about the rankings? Do they mean nothing to
Exactly.
you? Like, what are the rankings for?
Yeah.
Because they're current rankings.
And the other thing is with Travis Head, you get a really good spinner as well. Like he's still a part-timer, of course, but he's bloody accurate. I remember when he was bowling against Chandimal and Kusal Mendis in that Sri Lanka series, he was getting some big turn, good revs. I think he got like a 3-5. Do you remember that test match? He got like 3 wickets
No,
against
yeah,
Lanka.
no, he did. Yeah, and
Yeah,
it was like 3 for like they're very tight. I think less than 20 runs as well.
yeah, and like
He
he was
just ripped
bowling,
through us.
he was getting beautiful spin, like
He's a very
really good,
handy part timer,
right?
man. Yeah.
He's a very handy fielder as well. And just because he has his a poor record in India, like he's only played a couple of tests there,
Yeah.
and that's why that's the reasoning behind it, and the fact that they wanted to try some other options. But I'm glad he's in the team. He made some runs. He showed that he is capable. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, and
Let's
that's
be honest, we all knew he was going to make runs because the way that he scores runs, the way that he accumulates runs, is very positive cricket.
yeah.
It's none of this like backed up into the corner, like glancing it away, this and that. It's
Yeah.
very attacking. It's very, and you need to take it up to the home country, man. You
Oh,
cannot be on the
absolutely.
back foot, right? You need to play positive strokes, and it's such a breath of fresh air, I guess, coming in the middle of the order. So it was good to see him at least hit a 40. But we'll wrap up that series. I do want to touch on a few other things before this episode comes to an end. We saw recently the start of the Women's T20 World Cup, and we've been chatting this one up for a few episodes now. It's really good to see.
Yes, very good.
I am very happy to announce, I guess, sort of declare that Sri Lanka beat South Africa in the opening game.
Yes, that was good.
It was a full packed house as well, so it was really good to see the girls come through. I did want to talk about, I guess, sort of women's cricket as a whole.
Yeah.
We see a lot of, I guess, sort of a lot of traction coming along, which is absolutely great to see. And also a lot of under 19 women's, because we, as you know, the under 19 women's T20 World Cup just concluded. Shafali Verma, the Indian girls, took that one home. So again, congratulations. We've already congratulated them last episode, but congratulations again. We did see a lot of, I guess, sort of unearthed gems come through the under 19, I guess, sort of the rankings all the way to the full size team. One such player, and we don't normally talk about these Bangladeshi female players, right? One young bowler, 18 years old, Miss Marufa Akhtar, has absolutely impressed the daylights out of me. I don't know if you've seen her, if you know who she is. Absolute wizard. Opening bowler for Bangladesh, only 18 years old. Is so good. And I want to just say, sort of like, what more can we do as like spectators of cricket or cricket lovers as a whole to sort of support these young ladies that have come through the ranks, especially from associate nations like Bangladesh? Obviously, we're talking about them now, but what more can the ICC do to sort of shed spotlight on players like this and sort of make cricket, a bigger thing? What do you think?
I think, look, it starts with obviously incentivizing women's cricket a bit more, and we're seeing that. Recently, there was a news report from the Sri Lanka cricket that apparently they had tripled the amount that they're paying ladies with their match fees and things like that.
Correct.
I'm sure you want to touch on the women's IPL that's coming up shortly, and there's big money being handed out to ladies there. But I think you just have to invest more in women's cricket, man. Like, cricket was essentially a women's game from the beginning. A lot of the rules of cricket were invented by women. The first World Cup was a women's World Cup, so it's a no-brainer that women deserve a bit of a spotlight. But ladies like Marufa Akhtar, Inoka Ranawira, there's a lady from South Africa, Marizan Kapp.
Ex-captain.
One of my favorite South African women's players is Sune Loose. Brilliant all-rounder. She's a good player too. Bisma Maroof from Pakistan, I also like her. She's quite talented. She gave birth. She had a baby daughter, and then less than 2 months, she was opening the batting for Pakistan. Like, how crazy is that?
I think there was a series with India, and like it was really good to see the women were all taking turns holding her baby. It was beautiful. Yeah, really good to see.
I think she scored like a 50 or something against India. Then as soon as she made the 50, she made like a rocking arm kind of gesture.
Really?
I think she was dedicating that 50 to her newborn baby daughter. So I think we need to really value these things and realize, women are coming a long way, and these women are like exceptional.
Definitely.
But Marufa Akhtar, there's a couple of girls from Scotland and a couple of girls from a lot of these sort of up and coming countries as well that are really making a mark.
And they're all. I don't know what's happened recently, but some of them are quite quick. They're bowling 110 Ks plus.
Yeah.
at the age of like 17, 18,
Yeah.
19. And we saw
Yeah.
like Shafali Boom and Richard Gosh, they both played in the under-19 World Cup just last month. So, and they're probably one of the better players in India. Like Richard Gosh scored, I think she scored like a 40 and helped India win last game.
Yeah.
These young girls can play, and it's really good because I think, I guess sort of the social norm previously was that like women's cricket and stuff was taboo. But the
Yeah.
beautiful thing now is we're seeing young girls come up and they're actually getting more exposure to the sport itself, and only
Yeah.
then can we see the likes of players, reminiscent of like Ricky Ponting and Sachin Tendulkar, who obviously started playing when they were quite young, come
Yeah.
as opposed to like, if you pick up a sport at let's say 23, 24 as a female, it makes it quite hard because when you peak, it usually takes about 4 or 5 or 6 years to peak, and then at that point you're already 30 and you're a senior player. But if you start playing at like 11, 12, 13, 14, just like little boys do when they play cricket, and then you start peaking at 17, 18, 19, and then you have a 12, 13 year, 14, even more if you've got the fitness levels
Yeah.
career to make out of that. So I think this is a really, really promising place women's cricket to be.
I mean, and just touching on Sri Lanka ladies, I was quite proud of this. So they defeated South Africa and they defeated Bangladesh as well. So they won 2 matches,
Correct.
which is quite good. But obviously they lost to the mighty Australian ladies, who are quite hard to
When they
defeat.
are a force. Yeah.
But I think the last game is against New Zealand. So look, if they can win that one, I think there might be an outside chance for quarterfinals. I'm not sure.
It'll be very tough. I think today's do or die game against New Zealand.
Yeah.
It'll be very, very
right.
tough. But even against Sri Lanka, Marufa Akhtar, pick of the bowlers, right? Sri Lanka 129 for 3. She took all 3 wickets, 4 overs, 1 maiden, 3 for 23.
Yeah, wow.
So, and as I said, she's only 18. So very, very, very good to
Having
see
a
her come up.
having a look at the table now for the Women's T20 World Cup, and I'll tell you what, Sri Lanka has a very good chance of making it into the quarterfinals. So put it this way: New Zealand have won 1 game. They've lost 2. They're on 2 points. Sri Lanka's got 2 games, so they're on 4 points, right? If Sri Lanka defeats New Zealand, then they're definitely in the quarterfinals.
Okay.
But if New Zealand defeats Sri Lanka, right? Sri Lanka can still get into the quarterfinals. Okay.
Who they have to beat?
But it's going to be a battle of the net run rate at that point.
Oh, okay. But so at least we need to make it close at the very least, is what you're saying tonight.
Yeah, but New Zealand's net run rate is a lot worse than ours, so they'll need to beat us by a fair bit to qualify.
Okay.
So I'll tell you what, Sri Lanka's in a good position. The Sri Lanka women's team is in a good position, and I've been following their journey. They've got some fantastic coaches at the moment. I think
definitely
the former Sri Lanka fast bowler who played in the 80s for Sri Lanka, Ramesh Ratnayaka. Is head coach, and he's been doing quite a good job with the girls there. But it's nice to see. I watched the highlights of the Sri Lanka games, and there's definitely a lot more passion. There's a lot of enjoyment when these girls play cricket. They're quite aggressive, and
it's good.
It's good to see.
Good culture there, for sure.
Yeah.
So look, one thing I want to talk about is what you mentioned it before, Nuwan, women's IPL or the WPL, I think it's called.
Yeah.
The auction was last week, and I was so surprised by some of the prices that were being forked out here. Honestly, because as for those of you guys that are listening, that might be listening from overseas, Dawn and I are both from Australia, and I think probably about 3 or 4 years ago, it was really hard for a female to live solely off of playing cricket. We have, I think they were getting paid about 55,000 per year. And although that is not like the lowest you'll get paid, it's not even comparable to what the men are getting paid. I think since then their base income has been lifted to about, if I'm not mistaken, about 80 to 85,000, which is very, very good. And at that kind of income, you can definitely comfortably live in Australia, especially as an athlete. So, and as you said, like I think Sri Lankan women, they previously got 250 USD per match. And it's been lifted to 750, which is huge.
That's a lot.
So with the WPL, it was really hard for us to sort of guess as to what these auction amounts are going to go for, right? So I've got a bit of a list here. No surprise as to who was, I guess, sort of the most expensive player to get bought. Miss Smriti Mandana, 3.4 crore. Absolute weapon with the bat. Such an elegant, classy batter. I'm not
Mhm.
sure if you can say batswoman. I don't know if that's a coin, a,
It
a term
is
that's
better.
coined.
It is better.
It's
It is
better.
better.
There you go.
Yeah, yeah,
You know.
yeah.
But really surprising, and I guess sort of in the best way possible. Ashley Gardner, all round from Australia, 3.2 crore in the
Yeah.
Gujarat Giants. I
Mm.
think she is ranked number one all rounder in the world, but 3.2 crore in AUD. I think it's over 550K.
It is, yeah.
So absolutely huge, and
Mm.
that is a very, very healthy paycheck to play in an IPL.
Yeah.
So it's really good to see these amounts of figures get passed around the women's sort of
Mm.
arena as well, not just the men's. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, I think there was and this is where I guess sort of there's a bit of controversy or a little bit of it had me scratching my head a little bit. It's really hard to say how teams sort of like pick and choose which females they give their
Mm.
because they all have a budget, right? If you're not
Mm.
aware, you get like a set amount of budget and you have to buy however many players that you'd like to buy
Within
with the
that,
budget
yeah,
provided,
within that,
right? It's
exactly.
fair. Um, so normally one would assume that you would pick players that are in form and things like that. And
Mm.
one way to sort of gauge who's in form is you look at the ICC Women's T20 Team of the Year.
Mhm.
Now, I guess sort of from the outside, you would expect because there's only 11 players there
Yeah.
that all 11 players get scooped up
Yeah.
in the auction. And you got players like Sophie Devine and even one Sri Lankan bowler, Inoka Ranawira, was in the
Yeah.
the T20 side of the year.
Mm.
Inoka Ranawira actually didn't get picked up at all, which is a little bit disappointing. And even Sophie Devine, she got picked up for peanuts in comparison to Ash Gardner and
Yeah, that's
and
so
everyone
weird.
else. So it
Yeah.
was quite strange, yeah. So I'm not really sure, I guess, of the rationale that comes behind it.
Mm.
It is obviously the first of this kind. So it'll be interesting to see, I guess, sort of in the years to come, how they sort of allocate their funding. They
Yeah.
obviously have their own sort of motives and plays that they had
Yeah.
in mind. But do you have any idea as to why, I guess, sort of Sophie Devine, absolutely brilliant all-rounder from New Zealand, one of the she's
Yeah.
actually a captain, by the way, of
Yeah.
the T20 side of the year.
Yeah.
And she just got the base rate of 50 lakhs, which is, I mean, it's still good money, but it's nowhere near to 3.4 crore or whatever.
What she's worth. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
What do you
think
think the rationale is behind that?
well, let's be real. I think a lot of these investors or companies that are like the franchise that are investing in these women, they probably don't follow women's cricket as closely. This is just my sort of analysis on it. It's a harsh thing to say. Maybe not as closely as
It's
like
a Harsha thing to say, yeah.
it is a
I
very
agree.
Harsha Bogle thing to say. I do aspire to be like the great Harsha Bogle one day. I'll be honest. I think a lot of these franchises that don't pay attention to women's cricket as closely as men's, because with men, it's always there. It's always in your face, especially in a place like India. At the same time, I think you mentioned this off air as well. And I think there is this sort of there is this motivation to just keep the Indian players, like to promote the Indian ladies as opposed to the other people around the world. It's it kind of shows. You look at, for example, the Royal Challengers Bangalore, right? And you got the likes of Smriti Mandhana. Well, that's without a question. But you've got these players like Poonam Kemna. You've got Komal Zanzad. You've got all these sort of like up and coming players that are just like in there, and you don't know who they are. You got like Renuka Singh, Risha Ghosh, fine.
Renuka Singh is very good.
Yeah.
Very, very good.
I mean, look, I think the way they balance it out though is if you look at the Mumbai Indians team, Natalie Silverbrunt from England, she almost made the same. She almost was bid the same amount as Smriti Mandhana, so she went for 3.2 crore.
Which team is this one? Sorry, Noah?
This is Natalie Silverbrunt from England. So she was picked up by the Mumbai Indians.
Mumbai Indians, yeah. Okay.
For 3.2 crore. So I'm reading off this article that you linked me from the Indian Express newspaper. So I think there's some sort of balancing act there. Ashley Gardner also went for 3.2, like you mentioned. There is sort of like this sort of it's like an exclusive club between Australia, England, and India. From what I can see, I'm
looks
very.
Like it, yeah.
But what fascinates me about this article is the number of unsold players, and some of these. Yeah, right. I'm shaking my head as well. To see Sune Luss not get picked, Danny Wyatt not get picked,
Alana King, your girl.
Yeah, Alana King even, but then you're telling me that she's not having a good time in the World Cup. So I don't know.
I mean, but like, it's hard to say, man. No, she's not having a great time in the World Cup, but she's still a world-class leg spinner, and they're very hard to come by.
Exactly.
They're very handy to have, and like to be unsold means you didn't even get the base level. We're not talking like nobody even wanted to have a sniff of that. Do you know what I mean? That's the thing. Danny Wyatt, absolutely great player. Kamari Adapadu, arguably one of the hardest hitters women's cricket has ever seen.
Chamari Adapadu is an interesting one because she is such a talented hitter, right? And
She
this
didn't ask
lady,
for a lot from memory. She didn't
no,
ask for like, yeah,
this lady played in the women's Big Bash for the
renegade,
Renegade
scorches, sorry.
Scorchers as well.
Mm.
Like she's got such a huge, like a good reputation in Australia.
She's hit like 170 against Australia in Australia. Like,
Yeah,
she has a
very,
very good pedigree. Like,
very. Oh yeah, a very very powerful lady, and for her to go unsold in this Premier League, that blows my mind.
doesn't make any sense. Yeah,
You know, for a long time, she was the only good player from Sri Lanka. Like,
yeah.
I'm not saying this in a condescending way, but Sri Lanka women's cricket literally only survived because of Chamari. You know what I mean? Like she was literally carrying the whole team on her back. I remember those matches, and
No,
I don't know,
definitely, yeah. As soon as she was out, the whole team was in shambles, and like
100%.
she was like, it's so like interesting. Like to be honest, and I'm just thinking about this now. If we're talking
Yeah.
about someone of a similar caliber, if you look at like the Netherlands back in the day, Ryan Tendescada was pretty much Tamari Adapadu of Australia,
He was.
of Sri Lankan women's, right?
100%.
Leagues ahead.
Yeah.
Leagues. Even Brendan Taylor in Zimbabwe was able to come to and play county cricket very, very well. Leagues ahead of everyone else in Zimbabwe. I mean, no disrespect to all the other good players, but
another name that comes to my mind is the famous John Davison, who used to literally carry Canada on his back.
okay.
Remember John Davison? I mean, he was born. He's like going back in the early 2000s, but he played for Canada. He was born and raised in Australia, but he was like a hard hitting batsman from Canada, and similar to Chamari, just carried Canada on his back. So yeah, I hear what you're saying. Just wanted to add that in there too. But yeah, continue. Sorry.
No, that's what I was saying. Like it really, yeah, as you said, you're right. Probably investors aren't exactly across these other players, and obviously Indian female cricketers are easy to market. So I guess there's a bit of a, sort of inclination to purchase those players. But and again, like it's the first season. We are very very happy to see these kinds of, I guess sort of like I was going to say dollar amounts, but Indian rupee amounts being handed out to these lovely ladies that are obviously at the very cusp of their sport, their talent, in their field. So yeah, very very interesting times ahead. I am going to be keeping tabs on the WPL for sure, and hopefully next season we get a bit more, I guess, sort of a spread in terms of players in terms of different countries. Because one thing that we can say without a doubt with the men's IPL is that it's been such a beautiful thing, and it's brought lots of countries together. A lot of beautiful friendships have been formed that otherwise would not have been formed through international players, right? A lot of coaching. It's always a really, really good thing. Globalization via sport is one of the easiest ways to bring countries together.
It is.
So hopefully, yeah, fingers crossed, everything's going in the right direction, Nuwan. With that being said, we have, I guess, sort of wrapped up everything I wanted to chat about today. A pretty eventful episode. So
lengthy chat today, but not regretting it at all.
It was a pretty good one. Lot to cover, you know. I mean, the Australian Test series alone with India is we could talk about that for an entire episode. So I'm glad that we got the women's stuff as well, because it's something we're both passionate about. Did you have anything else you want to touch on briefly before we wrap up, Nuwan?
No, I'm actually keen. I'm actually going to keep a close eye on the women's T20 World Cup and the remaining Test matches of this Border Gavaskar Trophy. And when we come back, we'll have heaps more to unpack, I guess, and see where it all goes from there.
Beautiful. So everyone listening in, we are wrapping up. Please keep an eye out for the podcast, which will be dropping on all your favorite streaming sites